this slide. So, right, so what are we going to do this week? This week's about assessment and development of the use. So last week we covered very much the developer's perspective of how we might look and assess an application, prepare an application. This week we really are just reinforcing that but flipping it to the assessment side or the assessing authority. So this is really leading in to some more of the aspects that we're looking at as part of assessment task 3. So it's like the other thing, we're going over it and we're reinforcing it and we're changing perspectives, we're keeping coming back to the same things. So it should start to be crystallising in your mind as to what we're actually doing. So we'll have a quick chat about last week, have a chat about the assessment tasks. I want to just reinforce this project phases review. We did some project phases last week, got a bit of a different take on it. Reinforcing about understanding what the application is for, and then talk about some specifics from the assessment side about when we're assessing an application. So, last week we talked about project phases. If you remember, we looked at it as with one of my super favourite flowcharts where we looked at, pre-feasibility, feasibility, options assessment, preparing documentation, approvals, and we tried to relate that to how, the steps are the same irrespective of the size of the project, but the method we might use and the time we might spend and the cost it might have for each of those phases may be a lot simpler and a lot less expensive and less timely for simple stuff, more formalised and expensive for more complex projects. We had a real look at some examples about project descriptions and locations, what they mean about jurisdictions, and how we might work our way through the assessment criteria in terms of the acceptable criteria, the acceptable solutions or the performance criteria. And finally, we looked at the issue about engagement and lodgement and understand what do council want, how can we help them get there. And if you remember, the big conclusion I kept on reinforcing is don't let, if I'm working for the developer, don't let council assume anything. Give them the information they need, even if you think it's obvious, okay? Were there any questions arising out of last week? Last week was fantastic then? Excellent. What we like to hear. So, assessment task 2, representations. Now, Emma, you're going to give a little bit of feedback.
I am, and also to say we're nearly finished. I've just got a few more to go, so should get them all back tomorrow afternoon. For now, I just need to make sure that we're...
Oh, that's my fault. I'm giving Bunfer extra work. Sorry.
No thanks to Dan. Bunfer and I are ploughing through them. So just to remind you how this is going to work is that we de-identify all the letters. Because Dan couldn't share the actual representations, you are providing all the representations. So we'll bundle them all up, put them in Milo under the case study, so that when you write assessment 3, you can have your nice table about all the issues raised in representations. There were 38 active people in there. There were 38 representations, of which 5 supported and all that stuff that you see at the front.
And the range of assessment, don't get embarrassed that when you read your own you think, oh no, everyone will know which one's mine, God looks daggy. Doesn't matter. Representations by their nature are a variety of perspectives and levels of competency and levels of detail, because we all come from different experiences and different walks of life, and we all have our own opinion on the development.
Yeah.
So I actually think it's good we've got a range of things. That's what normally happens. It's not unusual. If everyone wrote an academic essay as a representation, it wouldn't be anything like real life.
Yeah. Now, having said that, there are some very slick representations that work very well. A bunch of you are practicing planners, so I knew exactly what to say. So one of those I've included, I've already de-identified it. So thank you for people who made it easy for us to just get rid of the front page. That's why the front page is blank, because I've taken off, in this case, a distance students report. This is not somebody with a PhD in the unit. There is no person as Dr. Anna Campbell, that's made up. So a bunch of you did a really great job of making it look completely authentic. This is one of the distance students. So the other reason for providing this in hard copy to discuss today is that this person took a particular perspective, and it was really clear from the get-go that they were representing Aboriginal heritage issues on site. Because you're going to need to talk about this as part of Assessment 3, and because some people might find it really difficult, here it is, really good coverage of the issues, incredibly well supported by evidence. So you'll get all of them, but I'm particularly pointing out this one as it's also relatively short. So what I'm reading at the moment is 12 pages. Don't need 12 pages to say what you need to say. This is only 20% of assessment. We weren't meant to tie you up in knots.
But don't panic, because if you've gone overboard on the representation side and done all of this assessment against planning scheme, well, guess what's going to be really easy? Assessment task 3. You've already done 3/4 of the work. So you just cut and paste it and review it, okay? So between the two, you should find about the same level of work.
So the only places that people have come unstuck is, like, a few people didn't mention the planning scheme or didn't mention the parts of the planning scheme that was relevant, which is a bit problematic because we're looking for you to demonstrate that you've understood. Here's the development application, here's the environment, and here's the planning scheme. How do you mash them all up? So some people left bits of that out. What else? Bumpy's in class next week, so if we need to talk a bit more about this, we can. Has anybody got any questions before we keep going?
Just on that, this is our unit outline. For those that haven't bothered reading it, you might be surprised to know that under each assessment task, there is a rubric of how the assessments are marked. So there's one for assessment task 2, this one's assessment task 3, there's one for, this is assessment task 2, there's one for assessment task 3. If you haven't mentioned the planning scheme at all, you haven't read that. Read your rubric, because it allows you to understand, well, what are those key criteria they want me to cover? What's okay, what's poor, and what's a good version? This is something I keep going back to my children who are now the oldest two in high school, and I say, go back to the rubric, read the rubric, plan out your assignment. Have an understanding of what they want. So, guys, read it, please. It's really important.
I think that's all I need to say, unless anybody's got any questions. We'll talk a bit more about it next week, particularly about how to deal with the representation in your planner's report, in case anybody's concerned about that. But yeah, we will get your marks back to you by Friday.
Okay. Assessment task 3. Oh, look at that. I had my pagination on when I copied it. Anyway, we went through it last week, and I said, please have a read, have a skim read, see if there's any questions you've got arising out of it early, so we can talk about it today. Has anyone got any questions or insights or concerns about it since last week? No? Everyone's fairly clear? Everyone understands what we're trying to do? We're not writing an academic essay, we're writing a technical memo. We're assessing the planning issues, not all of the things that everyone's written about. Some of them will be, if someone said, well, I think the future colour of all the houses should be purple. We're not looking at that. You know, I think that there should be a hot water, solar hot water connected for every of the units so that we have renewable energy efficiency. If that's not a criteria in the planning scheme, it's like, this is what was raised, this isn't relevant. There's nothing in the planning scheme that deals with it. Okay, so, you know, we need to really understand what the relevant planning scheme provisions are. And then how we think it stacks up against it. The extra bit, and we're going to get onto this later on, is about any extra advice we can give the applicant. No, we don't assess a threatened species permit, but yeah, you're going to need one or you're not going to need one because of these things that we've discovered in our assessment. So, and finally, there's a recommendation. I think this should be approved subject to conditions dealing with A, B and C. Or I think it should be refused because of A, B and C. Okay, yep.
This technical memo is designed for the owners, right? For the owner to read, right? And should we cover all the issues?
No. You are in this scenario, which is the scenario that happened in reality. You are the planning consultant, me, who was asked by council to prepare a report on this. In real life, I actually wrote the agenda report that went to council. You're writing a technical memo, and the reason I'm changing it is I don't necessarily want you to follow the agenda report format that councils might have, but I want you to cover the same issues. And I'd like it if you used a bit more diagrams and those things that our agenda report template wouldn't have allowed. So, but you're still doing the same things. You're acting as if you're the planning authority, as if you're council or employed by council to look at it from council's perspective. Does that make sense?
I mean, there's 38 representation, right?
Yep.
Should we examine all of them?
Yeah, okay. We'll cover this later, but as the planning authority, under the legislation, you're required to look at all of the issues raised by representation. You don't have a choice, you have to. If you don't, it can be shown later on they didn't look at all the representations, therefore their decision was invalid. You know, it's like you didn't advertise an application that should have been advertised, therefore the decision you made was invalid. You are required to examine all of the issues. Now, how you present those issues is up to you. You could go through every single representation in detail and say, representation 1, issues, and write something against it. And do that for all 38. And then, you know, on page 470, you could put your conclusions. Or you could say, here are the representations and here are the issues they raised. So we had 15 of them raised the colour of the house. We had 17 of them look at the height of the building. We had 12 of them look at something else. And you then, from a thematic perspective, you're looking at the issues and addressing them. This is covered under the planning scheme, and here's my consideration. This isn't covered under the planning scheme, but is relevant or not relevant. So you have to look at all of the issues. Does that make that clear?
Oh, yes. And when you're doing this, you try to keep it in neutral perspective, right?
Yeah,
okay.
you're objective, you're weighing up the things, yeah.
So it's okay you think this representation has its reasoning, right?
Yeah, some you're going to say this is representation is valid or, you know, doesn't have, you know, any issues that are relevant. There is no right and wrong answer, okay? We don't care if you think it should be approved or you think it should be refused. I don't care. The issue is the process you went through to reach that conclusion, and making sure that you looked at all relevant provisions of the scheme and assessing the application against those provisions and considering the issues raised by representation. And, you know, whether you look at something and say, well, this is a great representation and I'm actually going to agree with them, that's fine. That may be what you say, but you need to have, you know, let's use a scenario. If the planning scheme said you can't build above 10 metres in height no matter what, there are no ability to extend that through a performance criteria, and your application was for 15 metres, okay, but someone crossed it out and wrote 10 on the application. Not that I've seen that happen before. Down Seven Beach. Wasn't quite that big, but someone raised my representation. I've scaled the drawing, and I think the drawing contains an error in its dimensions, and it should be rechecked. And you go, oh, look at that. Scale it up. Something's wrong here. You can either write the application or write the report and say, this issue was raised, this is relevant because the planning scheme says you need to go 10 metres in height, therefore we should refuse it because it's clearly in excess of 10 metres in height, okay? Or what you'd then normally do in practice is you ring up the applicant and say, mate, you've got a problem. If I'm going to council, I'm refusing it. Do you want to come in and talk about it? And give them the opportunity to put it on hold, fix it and resubmit it. Okay, we talked about the phases of development last week, and I had a flowchart. This is just a different version. I've seen a million of them about. This pretty much has the same steps, but it looks at the issue of if I was doing an ESIA, or an environmental social impact assessment, and a design at the same time. Now, in most cases, you'll have someone doing the SIA and you'll have someone doing the design, and you need to be able to speak to each other. Or in some cases, you might be involved in a consortium that's doing the whole lot together. What I really want to point out, this is the approval phase, the red one, lodgement and approval. Similar to what we raised last week, this is the bottom part of the iceberg under the water. This is the stuff that as the council, you don't see. You don't see all their concept studies and their background reviews and their red flags assessment, identifying their showstoppers, and you don't see all their initial stakeholder consultation and their public meetings and those things. You don't see the feasibility process where you've got more the pre-feasibility and feasibility study where you're refining your options, you're reviewing your design, you're understanding the financial implications. You don't see all your preliminary environmental impact assessment. You might see some of the detailed ones that come out of here. There might be some here that you've done at the surface level which says, no, it's not an issue, that's fine, and that gets carried through. But all of this happens before you turn up to council generally. You might have done a little bit of consultation with the council in here, but council, under the legislation, can't assess the application or start assessing the application until they have a formal application, which is here. They can certainly say that this is what the planning scheme says, here are the assessments we'll want you to have, here's what the application requirements, here are the fees. They can give you advice, but they can't start assessing it or committing themselves to a decision until they're in this formal process. And they can't make a decision until they enter their formal decision-making process. Then, of course, assuming it's approved, you've got all this. Rick gave us a great video last week of trucking some large components in Cattle Hill Wind Farm, you know, that's all part of this construction management process. We saw the big cuts in and the road works and the stream crossings so they could get the components into the site. They would have had traffic management plans, they would have had environmental management plans for the stream crossings, they'd have, you know, upstream and downstream assessments for, you know, the aquatic ecology in the streams, potential impacts. All of this is done through here probably because we're talking about a construction action. So there can be so much work done here right through to we commission something, and then we've got ongoing operational commitments and management, etc. Yeah, and if we've said in the impact assessment we're going to do this and we're going to give back to the community and we're engaging in our social licence activities, this is when we're implementing it. Here's when we're communicating. Here's when we're gathering feedback. Here's where we're monitoring and rectifying when we find there's a problem. So, this is a project life cycle. This is the little bit we're kind of talking about today. Any questions out of that? This coupled with the one
relevant
Hazy?
Just a quick irrelevant question. So prior to the stage where the paper gets to you, are you in a position of giving advice regarding any of those steps?
Look, if I was a council, someone could come to me at this phase and say, oh, I'm thinking of doing this. The level of my response is going to be determined by how much information they can tell me.
Right.
They say, I'm looking at a wind farm somewhere in Clarence. That's good, mate. What else can I say?
But how formal is the process?
No, there's no formal process. So some council, particularly on the mainland, will charge you a consultation fee to come in and talk to them, which I think is a bit rude. Because I mean, you know, it's not like I want to go to council. So. But to me, and we'll talk about this later, I believe from a customer service perspective, and this comes out of operating in this role for over 10 years, that anything I can do to help people understand the process is good. Here's what planning scheme says. Yeah, oh, we're looking somewhere over here. Well, here are the zones over there, mate. They're good ones for what you're looking for, they're not. I can't make any commitment about how we'll view it, but I can help you understand the process you're going to have to go through to lodge it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So you can give advice.
Oh yeah, advice on process.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a slide about that in a sec. And I think it's a really good point, because that's what I think we should be here for. If you're working in that role, because of course we're not all going to. Now, this is going back to some stuff we talked about last week. Why is it important to understand the scope and nature of an application? Last week we said it was so we can identify the relevant processes and the relevant things, the relevant documentation. From council's perspective, or the decision maker's perspective, I've got to make sure that I understand what it's classified under the scheme as. Not what the developer thinks it's classified as, what I think it's classified as. Sometimes, in my role when I was at local government, I actually got a legal opinion because things were not clear. Especially now with the interim planning scheme and the Tasmanian planning scheme, all saying you don't have a miscellaneous use class. You have to fit it into what best fits. 99.9% of the time that's easy. There'll always be something someone comes up with that will challenge you on it. We raised this the other week, and it's in Jared's notes in his tribunal stuff. Getting the advertising correct. If I fail in, because this is all leading to this part, if I fail in process as council, I can be held liable for the costs of taking it to the tribunal to have it determined. No other body under any of the legislation, any of the decision makers are liable like local government is. as I said to you the other week, I've been and put applications, forward to the paper on the Wednesday, for the Wednesday edition, and it got stuffed up. Something went wrong. Description was wrong, or the date of the close of representations was wrong, or the address was wrong. And so we've resubmitted it, double checked it. And Saturdays was stuffed up. We've gone and we've lodged it again. And Wednesdays were stuffed up. 4 times we went through on one application until they actually got right. Now, my 42 days doesn't stop because the paper stuffs it up. So each time we're now getting squeezed from getting the decision out the door. And of course with that is understanding all the implications about time and when people can lodge things and when they can't. And all those things that make up or constitute advertising. Getting it right leads to informed decision making. So, as in response to your question, if I'm writing something for council, like the alderman, and they're making the decision, I need to make sure I give them all the information they need to make the decision. If I give them half the information, then how are they making an informed decision? If I don't tell them that 38 people are jumping up and down about it, they might get a bit miffed. But also it means that their decision could be invalid. And of course, under Tassie's legislation, if you fail to determine within the 42 days or as extension as agreed between the applicant and council, the applicant can take you to the tribunal under a failure to determine. And whilst the legislation says that it's a deemed approval subject to the conditions of the tribunal in hearing the matter again does have the power of refusal. But if people don't want council to deal with it and want to go straight to the tribunal, they may try to do something that's going to disrupt that and make you fail. So you need to be squeaky clean on everything. And you think, oh yeah, that's not hard, we'll get that right. In 2000, there was, at Clarence, there was between 1,000 and 1,100 DAs submitted in the calendar year. I can't remember the exact number. And probably a quarter of those went to council, as in required a formal agenda to be written. So, and there was 3 of us doing it. So your workload can compress quite significantly because you can't predict how many you're going to get through a door. You might have 30 one week and 4 the next. Okay. So, irrespective of your workload, you've got to be squeaky clean on them all. Right. Getting some examples, and I'm sure you might have some questions coming out of these. We did some examples of use classification last week. Well, here's another one. And this is something I did up north. So, put up a wind monitoring mast. Before you put a wind farm or that up, they want to put up an anemometer which measures the wind at a certain height. They want to get it as close up to the height of the turbines as possible, and they normally want to keep them there at a couple of points, certainly for large scale development, a couple of points on the site for at least a year, if not longer. Why? They want to be able to measure the resource. Why? Because the consistency and the strength of the resource makes a huge difference to the design of the wind farm and to how they're placed and orientated and the size of the turbines that can function, which of course all equals my return for my investment. So, wind monitoring masts, tall, skinny things, big guy ropes that hold it down, stop it from falling over. They're very tall, 100 metres, 90 metres, 110 metres or more. So, the definition, this is in Northwest, classified as minor utilities because it's the closest thing we've got about electricity, etc. But it doesn't say wind monitoring mast, does it? But it's the closest fit. Council agreed with me. So that's the definition as a minor utility, but the minor utility falls within the use class of utilities. So the zone and the controls within the zone relate to the utilities use class. In this case, in the rural resource zone, it's permitted. It complies with the definition of utilities, of minor utilities. However, it's discretionary as it cannot meet all the relevant acceptable solutions, one of which was a height limit. Not many things will have a height standard of 110 metres. So, fairly standard. But in this case, it's like, well, of all the choices I've got, there's probably 2 or 3 you could squeeze it into. This is the one that's used for, you know, power lines, those type of things. This is an associated function with an energy generating facility. This is what was agreed, it fell within. But it's not clear cut. And of course, you could have a representation that says, well, I don't think it was classified properly. I think it should be use class Z, which is prohibited in the zone. You might have 2 use classes that are very similar in description. In the old planning scheme, we certainly did, because we would have single dwelling, multiple dwelling, ancillary dwelling, and a whole number of different criteria. In the new scheme, we've got residential. However, then we've got it split into different functions within residential. So it takes away some of the argument, not all. Now, classification, I said, some people might write representations. Now, the only reason I'm putting this up because it's straight out of the tribunal's information, so it's been a public document. So, I don't care that we've got a name and those things in there because it's a public document. What happened is a wonderful planning consultant was helping Caltas do a development in Campbelltown, and over the road another development was proposed, very similar. Context is probably worthwhile. Caltas was proposing a rezoning that involved a truck stop, as we talked about last week, which was an automated fuel stop, so pull up, use the card, fill up the truck, keep driving. No, you know, bar, no food stop, no nothing. Place to go to the toilet and that's it. Over the road, somebody was proposing for United Petroleum. Everyone know Mood Food, that type of 24-hour large convenience store, restaurant, fuel station that was being proposed over the road. So they both fall within the same use class, they're at just either ends of the spectrum. And Caltas wanted to make a representation because they were proposing some access arrangements which would be in conflict with Caltas's. So a friendly consultant helped them write a representation. There was a representation submitted by a planning consultant, where we noted, though, that the service station talks about proposed restaurant. We didn't believe that it was integral and subservient to the vehicle fuels sales and service. Now you might think, oh, you're a bugger pointing that out. Why'd you do that? Our position was, we support what they want to do, because they want to rezoning as well. And if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for us, or vice versa. What we were concerned with was an aspect of the development. So our representation was, we support the development. However, this aspect we're concerned about, I also raised, I don't think it's advertised properly, because I don't think they've got the classification right. It would still be a discretionary use in that zone, so it's not like they couldn't do it. I'm just saying they need to get it right or they're going to come across a problem later on. So this was an interesting one because it relates to an integral and subservient part. So the integral and subservient aspect is the secondary use really has got to be serving the primary use. Given that it's essentially the restaurant was the size of McDonald's, it was capable of functioning independently and in no way depended upon the primary aspect of the site, which is the vehicle fuels and sales. So what I was saying is, well, the planning scheme allows you to propose 2 different uses on the site. This should be 2 uses, not one subsidiary to the other. In the commission actually, the tribunal actually agreed with me and made sure that when they issued a permit, that it was a permit for a rezoning and approval of the vehicle sales and vehicle fuel sales and service and a restaurant. So that the tribunal were able to fix that issue, or the commission in this case, sorry, were able to fix the issue. But that's where it becomes important, getting things right. Any questions? Okay. Last one before the break. So today might be a quick day. Mentioned this about before. Getting on to your question, Hafey. This is the slide I had about it. So, what is customer service? Is it important in the role of planning? Well, we talked about last week, I think it was last week or maybe the week before, about establishing a good relationship with the planning authority if I'm a developer. Rick, I think you raised the issue of making sure that you're open and honest in the communication and you documented what you said, and so that everyone was on the same page. I really see there's an opportunity as a council person in making sure that everyone's on the same page and has the same level of understanding. We've got a role as educator. So, I have someone coming to the counter at council. I want to build a shed. I can do that, can't I? Well, maybe. Well, what do you mean, maybe? Well, there's a plan scheme. You need to be able to comply, and there's a building code. Whoa, God, back. Imagine a short, old, grumpy man. What do you mean? I used to be the council engineer here, and we could do whatever we wanted. True story. And you actually then say, well, I'm sorry, mate, that's not how we operate anymore. Might have been, shouldn't have been. Here's how we do things now. So, we've got to be able to talk to the applicant. They don't want to come and talk to me. They don't want to spend money with me. They don't want to lodge applications with me. They don't want anything to do with me. But we've got to start forging this relationship. So, Planning 101. This is a planning scheme. Here are zones. Here's the relevant provisions. All the things we've talked about. And you then have to take them on the journey. Now, some people, of course, come in, really strong level of understanding. I've been here 35 times before, build spec houses all the time, I've looked at the planning scheme myself. Great, we can now pitch our conversation here because we've established our prior knowledge, we've established our common language, and we can have a good discussion. Of course, it goes wrong sometimes. I had someone come in once and say, oh, I want to build a house. Okay, well, where do you want to do it? Or somewhere in Howrah. And we had the discussion, and then halfway through he goes, oh, well, I am, because I was saying you would need to get someone who can design the house. Oh, I'm a draftsman, I do this for a living. Well, why didn't you say so half an hour ago, mate? We wouldn't have needed Planning 101. So, I failed to establish our prior level. I failed to ask the questions, well, what do you know? You've been through this process before? Heard about planning schemes? If I'd asked a couple of quick questions, we could have really helped that relationship along. The other one, we've got to educate the public. The application comes in, it gets advertised. The first thing people hear about it, unfortunately, is they get a letter or they see a notice on the fence. The neighbour hasn't bothered to knock on their door and say, hey, mate, you're going to get a letter, let's go through it. So the public comes in, what's this all about? I don't understand, I can't read plans. That's fine, reading plans is a skill, not everyone has it. So we now have to go through the process. This is what the applicant can do, this is what they've done, here are your rights, here's the process, you can make a representation, etc. So we've got an opportunity to take the public on the journey. Now that can be their first time or it can be their 400th time. Because we have people who make serial representation writers. And it depends on how much we want to go in customer service. I got called up once, there was an application for a vet down in Howrah, and a lady rang up and she said, I see this notice on here, what's it all about? And I explained it, and I said, look, and the application's on our website, you can have a look at it. Oh, I don't connect to the internet thingy, I don't know what that is, I'm 78 years old. Oh, well, you can come in and have a look at the council. I don't get out much, my husband's blind, and so, you know, it's not something we can do. Right, okay. What do? I got in the car, I said, well, I'm coming out this afternoon to look at something, I'll call in. Took him a copy of the plans, called him. I actually rang up the applicant. I said, I've got someone who wants to see, do you mind if I take them a copy of the plans? Because in this case, they're not just viewing them, we're giving them a copy. They said, no, that's fine. Went down there, saw them, sat down, had a nice cup of tea, and went through it. They were happy simply because someone had bothered to explain it. They didn't write a representation, they understood the process, and they were happy. But it was the first time in their life that they'd been involved in the process. I'd like to think it was a good experience, but it's not always a good experience. Okay, people walk in and immediately are very antagonistic, confrontational, especially builders who are being around a lot. Very confrontational, a lot of them don't want to hear the word no. So we need to be able to deal with all types of people and educate them. And then of course the last one, educating the decision maker. Every 2 years, half councils get elected, or is it every 3?
4 now.
Or is it? No, you serve a 4-year term.
Oh, I see you mean.
Every 2 years, half the council gets flipped, potentially. So, you're constantly, if there's new people on the council, you've constantly got the opportunity of new people in the decision-making role every 2 years. Now, you've got to be able to explain to them the process, the issues, and do it in a way that they're actually going to be able to understand. They might come in and talk to you about it, that's fine, you know, but here's our opportunity to influence all of these. And I believe that we've got a customer service obligation to do it. Getting back to your issue, Hafey, about what can we talk to them about? Certainly early on, we can talk to anyone about the process. You want to do this, on there, here's the process. You know, issues. Well, we probably need a bit more information to be able to understand what are the issues. Here are the likely issues. Here's things people have raised before. Here's common things in the area. Here are specific things, wind farms. We know we're going to have blade glint. We know we're going to have infrasound, even though it's difficult to prove. We're going to have noise, we're going to have visual. We can go through a list of them. So we can help people along about the issues. And of course, what are the options for outcome? At an early level, I want to build a casino there. Sorry mate, casino's prohibited, can't do it. The computer says no. So that's a really easy way we can help them, or yes, it's discretionary, here's a process, or yes, it's permitted, or no, you need it, rezoning, or whatever, but we can talk to them about those options. And the public, what are your options? We went through it the other day. The public's ability to be involved in the process. We can talk to the public about that. Anything out of that? Any questions? Thoughts? Comments? Thinking I'm a real nice guy to drive down to someone in Howrah?
Yes.
It's a lovely couple. She was lovely. Both of them.
Just before we have a break, this came up for me around the cable car because it was such a public issue, it was in the news quite a lot, and some of the aldermen, including, well, the now Lord Mayor, but then on and the Reynolds, was, I thought, treading a fairly fine line, but having thought about it, it was about the process and it was about the issues of where the proposed road was on council land. But it was still a little bit risky because there could be the perception that she was biased, and she's certainly been accused of that in the public All right, so, you know, you have to be careful.
It raises the issue of not what you tell them, but what you can't tell them. And you need to be very clear about that. I'm sorry, I can't commit council to a decision. Educating about your role. If someone writes a representation, I will be writing the report to council. I will make a recommendation only. I may not be the person who writes it. You need to be able to tell them the truth. The other aspect of that is, of course, irrespective of what you say, their 400 Facebook friends know more. And they will tell you more. And they know the process and the people and the issues better than you do because they read it on Wikipedia. So you're constantly trying to give factual information in an environment where there's lots of other advice which may be correct, which may not. Okay? You're also dealing with the battle of people's legacy or their garbage from dealing with councils previously. I'm sure everyone's had a bad experience with a council at some stage. I have. You know, even ringing up, hi, I'm a consultant planner, I want to talk about this, and I get put through planning 101. Sorry, can we cut the chase? I'm a bit past what your plan scheme's called. I've read it. So we've always got to think about, you know, how we might be perceived, how we've got an opportunity to take that person on a journey to re-establish a better relationship. You know, they'll come in, they'll tell you about how much they hate their neighbour, you know, and you're just like, yes, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about the upstairs extension on the other side. Oh yes, but this neighbour at night, he does this and they do this. And you've got to work your way through that. And then of course you actually, I hate to say, you've got the conspiracy theorists as well. We used to actually plot on, I don't know if I've said this before, on our JS we plotted some of our more regular customers, we'll call them, particularly difficult people. So, and it wasn't a public document, but what we used it for was if an application came in for next door, and I had, say, Emma had only joined council a couple of weeks ago, you know, and maybe hadn't been greatly experienced with Mr. or Mrs. X, and I would get the application, so when Mr. or Mrs. X would come in, they'd deal with me, and I'd spare someone the brunt of going through, you know, someone who wanted to tell you about the black jets, someone who wanted to threaten you, someone who wanted to do a whole bunch of stuff. Why? Because it was good for us as a planning team to not, you know, expose someone to a very aggressive and unwelcome person. I mean, we see in the legislation, well, we see people being called serial litigants and being actually banned from lodging, well, they won't consider applications from them, you know, legal cases from them. I wish we could do that from council, because there are certainly one or two people, and I'm sure there's one in every council, that, you know, the council officers wish they didn't have to deal with.
But is that just people who really care and therefore
No.
are representing on everything because they have their finger on the pulse, or is that
No,
people who
I'm not talking about the people, like, I'll use her name, because
Well,
I'm sure she
can I just add to that? Are they ever right?
Sometimes they are. I've had people point out something and I've gone, I'm glad you raised that, gee, I missed that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Yep, it's in being advertised, you've raised that, great, good pick up. There used to be a lady who was the chair of a land care group in Clarence when I was there at the time. Extremely knowledgeable, would make representations on most of subdivisions around a particularly large parcel of land that I used to do all the subdivision approvals for, or refusals. And she'd send me large documentation every time. But she was one of the loveliest people you would ever meet. She cared, she wrote lots of stuff, but she was willing to sit down and talk about it. So we actually had a really good relationship. This was, we're forging a relationship between an NGO and a planning authority. So she knew I wouldn't always agree with her, and I knew she wouldn't always agree with me. But she cared, and I didn't care how many representations she wrote. I'm talking about the particularly difficult, aggressive, rude, horrible people that you will get. You know, people who threaten to come and pull out the shotgun if they see you. You know, we had a particular incident one time where we had a gentleman who was very upset about something, and I was talking to someone later on who lives down there, and she said her back door slammed, and her first thought was, oh no, so-and-so's coming to shoot me with a shotgun. So the last thing you'd want to do is put someone fresh out of uni 2 weeks into the job to deal with that person. Also, I had the advantage, I'm large, male, couldn't hang over a counter a bit more than they can hang over. So, whilst I don't like to say that, a lot of these people in the real world, in the past years ago, older male builders didn't want to hear something from a well-educated young female at the counter. I'm sorry to say, but it's the case, and I'm sure you will have experienced or have seen it. And they would come out and get me and say, I've just told so-and-so this, and they won't believe me, they want to hear it from you. Walk out the front. So, you've just been told this and this. That's absolutely correct. Which part didn't you understand? But that's the perceptions and the personalities and those things you have to have strategies to deal with. But you don't give them a free ride. But win this, customer service. If I annoy someone, the first thing they do is ring their mate the alderman or their mate the mayor, who rings the GM, who comes over and gets in my ear. And if you're working in council, we'll get in your ear. So how can we defuse these situations in a manner where people can walk away without being upset? You know, a whole number of methods. I used to have someone who would scream at you on the phone. You'd say, great, come in and see me. You walk in the door, scream at you in front of the audience of the people. You're ushering them into a room, shut the door, and they'd go quiet because they didn't have an audience to pander to. But that was the personality of the person. And then you've got people who would just agree with you and then get home, ring up the mayor and complain. Passive-aggressive approach. You've got to deal with all these personalities, and somehow you've got to educate and help them along the way. Does that answer your question? I like it when people care, because if you write a proper representation, you actually do half of my work for them, because you've analysed it with a clear, educated, analytical mind, as opposed to just a diatribe. So when we write representations, we should be thinking about how, if I was a planner, how I would like to be treated and what I would like to read. Does that make sense? Any other questions about that?
Can I just go back to the cable car question? So, I think you spoke last week about how if you've got your opinion out in the public as a councillor, obviously you're no longer eligible to have a say on it. Yep. So sort of the cable car, it seems like pretty much all councillors have come out in the media and said the case. Is that because they don't really have a role in assessing?
Well, they would. Cable car, well, unless it gets taken off them. And my understanding is the cable car will require council consent for at least part of it. There's a real danger, and this is educating the decision maker, and it may not be our role, it might be the general manager's role. Here are the things you can't do. So, yes, there's a real danger for council that they're going to compromise their decision and abrogate their responsibilities by assuming an issue, assuming a decision, or the perception of having assumed a decision. So, of course, social media says, oh, I've got an excerpt of, Alderman Joe Bloggs saying A, B and C, and of course, as everyone can get taken out of context, we'll be very careful. So, I think it's very interesting. There are so many opinions out about that they may well have
been so publicised,
caused a problem. And what should they be saying? Well, you want to hear your elected members respond to you, but on the other hand, they have a role which they can only exercise within that narrow confines of formal application, formal decision making. And so there's...
It's particularly tricky with the cable car because it feels like most councillors have run on it of a platform,
Yeah.
either opposing or
Yeah.
supporting, so they have it very much in the public eye what their predetermined stance is. So that's an interesting one.
And it's not unknown. I've seen many of them when there's a number of representations, the aldermen fall over themselves to go with the public opinion because they count the votes. Oh, it's up to election time. You know, being cynical, you see them do it. And then sometimes they go, no, I really care about this, they want to debate the ins and outs. And where's the rhyme or reason between their engagement on either?
And then when you're supposed to be impartial, then
And exactly right. Yes, there hasn't been an impartial say.
Yeah.
Getting back to this point, and everything you said just reinforces it, informing the decision maker of their roles and the process is also a crucial part.
So maybe before we have a break, just touch on what the consequences of that bias or perceived bias. It is covered in Jared's manual, but I know things are a bit hard to find there. But it's why Dan ended up doing the planning report for Jules Germain case study.
So just getting back to, I'm not sure if it was picked up when I explained it a couple of weeks ago. There is a council planning officer who lives near this development. That is our assessment task 3. Now, of course, this is in reality, this was a couple of years ago, it was lodged. When it came in, council immediately knew, well, most of the people around there know the planning officer lives there. You know, it's obviously a prominent issue with them. There could be a perception of bias. This is also common when council's the applicant and they don't want it. They want to have some separation between their role as an applicant and a decision maker. And the way Clarence used to do it is get an independent consultant to write the recommendation. So the assessment and the recommendation was done at as much of an arm's length as possible. Because I worked there for 11 years and knew everyone and know the process and know the council, well, not some of the new ones, most of the councillors, it was an easy call for them to say, hey Dan, do you reckon you can look at this? Yes, I don't have any particular interest in the land, I don't have a conflict of interest, so I'm happy to do it. But this perceived bias, if I live next door, at Canorchy years ago, there used to be a person who used to write the approvals for their spouse's application. So, is that bias? Irrespective, and I challenge you, irrespective of how impartial you try to be, you're going to have an unconscious bias in that case.
And it's a perceived bias even.
I think it's beyond more than a perceived bias. But of course, in Tassie, if you don't know someone, you know someone who does. So it's very difficult to get that perception out of it, unfortunately. But yes, it's a really, really good point. Jared covers it. Of course, in an appeal, there's the opportunity to raise it. There's been many case laws or many Supreme Court cases about perceived bias at the tribunal and at the commission, notably by someone in Clarence, perhaps. But it's case law. Look up the Supreme Court.
Can I ask a totally unrelated question about case law? What's the best way to just research case law and find cases if you're looking to support your...
Yeah, so if you go on to the Osley site, so I think that's in Jared's notes, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a link in mine.
www.osley.edu.au. You can look up case law across Australia, so you can choose the jurisdiction and choose the court or the specific tribunal. So you can choose the Tasmanian Tribunal, you can look up the Commission's decisions, and so you can look for keyword search, a whole number of search options. I used to use that a lot when I was working in council and I tried to look up. And of course there's, as Jared was saying in his documentation, there's what's terminology we are required to follow? Establish the precedent. There's a precedent from Supreme Court if they say you need to interpret this way. So binding precedent. And then if the tribunal issues something, an edict, it's a non-binding precedent. The reason being is that the tribunal act as the planning authority when